Welcome, everyone, to Christiana's Psychic Cafe. I hope you've had a great weekend. I have an amazing show for you today. I'm so excited. I'll be bringing on my guest in just one moment. First, I'd like to do our card of the week, and I'm working today with Ciro Marchetti's Legacy of the Divine Tarot. In my opinion, one of the best new tarot decks that we've had in the past few years. So let's pull a card at random and see what we get for the week. Ooh, ooh, ooh. Okay, you guys. We got the Tower. The Tower. And it's reversed. It came up reversed. So, when I see the Tower reversed, and I'm thinking about it as a card for the week, it's Sunday night. What can we expect over the coming week? You know, the Tower reversed tells me that whatever you might be facing in your life that you're concerned about, that you're worried about, whatever changes you're going through, it may not be as bad as you think. The Tower is a difficult card. It's a necessary card. It talks about endings and new beginnings, but they are drastic and they are sudden. And when it's reversed, it's still drastic, and it can still be sudden, but it's not as bad as you think, or difficult things have already happened, and you may be in the process of already starting to rebuild. So don't let that get you down, not as bad as you think. And as I said, we have a great show. I'm going to bring on my guest in just a moment. His name is Jim Cummins. He's an astrologer. He has been an astrologer for more than 40 years. We're going to talk about his life in astrology. We're going to talk about his take on astrology. Those of you who know me know that I am woefully illiterate when it comes to astrology. For a tarot reader, it's really a shame. Well, I was woefully illiterate. I've started hanging out with Jim, and he has taught me more in a few short hours about astrology than I was ever able to glean before. He has a real clear way of explaining it. So I think you're going to learn a lot from him today as well. I've also asked him to give us some perspective on what the heck is going on our planet. So I think you'll find this a very interesting show. I am monitoring the chat room. So if you're in the chat room and you have questions for Jim, go ahead and chat him in, and we'll make sure he gives an answer. So at this point, let's bring him on. Welcome to Christiana's Psychic Cafe, Jim. How are you?
I'm doing great, and I'm grateful that you've asked me to come join you, Christiana.
Oh, it is my great pleasure, Jim. You know, I'm always happy to meet new people. You and I met about a month ago, and I'll tell you what, I feel so blessed to have you in my life, and equally blessed to have you here on the show tonight. Now,
what a sweet thing to say. Thank you so much. I'm equally blessed to have you in my life too, dear. Thank you so much.
You're a sweetheart. So here's my first question. Where did it all start? How did you get interested in astrology? How old were you? How did it happen? Tell us about the beginning.
Well, it may seem an odd way to look at it, but I honestly got interested in astrology as a little boy, listening to my mother read Bible stories to me.
Really?
I'm serious. I knew that surprised you.
Yeah.
The bottom line was that all of the important people in the Bible had knowledge that was exceptional for their particular group and so forth. We can go back to Joseph, Moses, even before that. We can go back into all of the period of the Israelites going into Egypt and so on. But as it says in the book of Acts, that Moses was learned in all the ways of the Egyptians. And the bottom line is that, the level of proficiency in Egyptian priesthood rested on adeptness in astrology. And, as my mother would read different stories and so forth to me about those great heroes of the Bible, I came to realize in later years that they knew and understood what we term in today's world as the occult sciences, and of which astrology is basically the mother of science. And where people would get kind of screwed up back then as well as now, they would get hung up on the creation and forget the creator. And that's a very significant distinction. Whereas, say, Joseph, Moses, and any of the prophets and so forth communicated with the creator, either directly or indirectly, primarily directly. And is in that communication and then seeing the patterns in the sky, such as, you read in the book of Job, about all the various different constellations and so on. These things were there for a purpose, there for a reason. You start in from the book of Genesis even. Everything's there for a reason, for a sign. The days and nights, they're for a sign. They're for seasons and signs. And so, over the years, I just stayed with that knowing, and, it began to unfold. And then when I got to be in, I guess, maybe the 5th, 6th grade or so forth, and we started studying the local solar system, then that just kind of made a lot of sense to me. Well, there they are. There's a rhythm to them, and they work in perfect order. And, there's a reason for that order. And when you apply that order to the affairs of humankind, then you have a correlation, a correspondence. You have, something that's repeatable, something that you can build on. I may not be saying it very well, but that's basically the bottom line of it. And then when I got in the U.S. service, I was in the Navy, and I learned some of the basic things about navigation. And, of course, it was really obvious, the process of drawing a chart is very similar to taking a three-point fix for a ship out in the middle of the ocean, except that we're doing it for an individual or for an event on the Earth's surface somewhere doing a chart. So, it just all worked together.
Wow. I think you explained that very well. You're getting a lot of support in the chat room, too, for your succinct way of sort of putting that all together, the ways in which we are guided by the stars, even when we don't think about it as astrology, as a navigation.
Mm-hmm. Excuse me, I didn't mean to interrupt you. We're part of the world in which we live. We're not separate from it. Separateness is the problem that causes all the problems in the world. The idea of separateness. It's a unified whole. Whether we can see the dark matter, the universes or not, doesn't mean it isn't there. Whether we can see gravity or electromagnetism doesn't mean they aren't there. It's the idea that we, in a physical form, are part of the world in which we live. The world on which we live, the Earth, is a part of a many-bodied solar system, which itself is a part of a larger universe, of course, it being the Milky Way. So the idea that we are connected is what is so significant. The idea that there is an absolute relativity is what is significant.
Beautiful. So let's go to this history. So here you are in the Navy, guided by the stars. How did you get from there to actually learning how to do a chart, which I understand back then, no computers. You were doing it by hand with an ephemeris. Isn't that right?
Well, so did everybody else in those days who did them without computers. Now, wherever we would go, even when I was in the Navy, and then I spent a lot of years on cruise ships after that, but wherever I would go, whatever port I'd be in, I would haunt all the old bookstores. And I bought every book I could get a hold of that had anything to do with the subject of astrology, as not only the computation process of it, but also the interpretation process, the history of it, and everything else. I just, I got hooked on it, so stayed with it and just, collected hundreds and hundreds of books on it, every one I could get my hands on.
Now, certainly we have a lot of books available to us today.
Today we do. In those days, you couldn't find them in America as easily. They were hard to come by back then. And I grew up in the Deep South. I was born in New Orleans. But I grew up in rural Mississippi, and there were none of those kind of things there. So, as a matter of fact, there was a lot of, let's say, social taboos against the idea of being interested in anything of that sort. It's devil worship stuff, So there was a lot of negativity to it.
So when did you make the transition from hobby to profession as an astrologer?
As soon as I got out of the Navy. I'm a musician as well. And, I've played all over the world as a musician, keyboardist. Well, I simultaneously, wherever I have been, I simultaneously have done charts. I began, the first time I ever got paid to do a chart was in 1964, so this is a while back. It's a long time ago, and that's I've stayed with it ever since. So I've always worn a dual hat, Gemini ascendant. Always worn a dual hat, so to speak, and always did both astrology and do the music. I'd play in the evenings and then do charts during the daytime, and or sometimes I take off from playing for several weeks and do just plain astrology charts and or teaching sessions and so on.
Wow. So now, and you bring up, this was I have a number of questions here, but I recognize that you have done astrology in many different places in the world. And in fact, Liv in Norway just signed into the chat room. So Liv is here with us tonight all the way from Norway. I assume you've spent some time in Norway.
Liv is I believe that's Liv Bitteringzee, who is a cherished friend of many, many years. Liv was my best man. She's a lady, elegant lady, but my best man at my wedding when, I got married here in the Clearwater area in Florida a number of years ago, and my wife, fiance at the time, my wife, asked, so, well, Jim, who you want for your best man? I said, I got a good running buddy. My friend Lee, who's quite an astrologer, great astrologer, in her own right. And now, when I was playing in Norway, we got to be buddies.
That's fabulous. I guess I have two questions regarding doing astrology in different parts of the world. The first is, how is it culturally different? I mean, as you say, it was easier to find books on astrology in other countries than it was in the U.S. What else can you say about different areas of the world and how astrology is viewed as part of their culture, as different from the U.S.?
It depends on the age of the culture more than anything else. Because the older the culture, the more understanding they are of things that matter. It seems to be.
Wow. Okay. And what about the actual process of doing the charts, of doing consultations for people? How is it different, if it is at all, to do a chart for someone in another country versus the U.S.? How is that different?
I don't find it any different at all. People are people no matter where you go, no matter what the cultural heritage may be of the individual. And people are people. We're all, like I say, part of the global universe.
Gotcha.
We're not different. The principles work. You saw in a chart the timing of things, relative to your own life. That works. It doesn't matter where you're from. It doesn't matter what your religious background or your cultural background or your ethnicity or anything else. The principles work.
Wow. Perfect. Very well said. So at some point you did hang a shingle in the United States, and this would have been what, back in the 60s, the 70s? Tell me about that.
Early 1970s, I would say for definite. I've been doing charts regularly, in this country since the 70s, except for the times that I was traveling overseas. Of course, that's where I was doing them then. But from the 70s on, early 70s on, I've done charts, practically every day since then.
And, a lot of us here tonight in the chat room and watching the show, and who will watch the show in archive, are also professional tarot readers, astrologers, psychics, healers, whatever. And we complain a lot here in 2013 about what we have to go through to try to have a legitimate business doing what we do. How was it in the 1970s?
I appreciate you asking that, Christiana, because I ran into a number of issues, especially in the Deep South, kind of the Bible Belt of the country, It's traditionally known as. Well, anyway, I was living in Florence, Alabama in the early 1970s for a brief period. and doing charts there. Well, the local constabulary, the local authorities decided, this is fortune telling. That's against the law. You must not do this. Da 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 da. And so I decided, well, I'm going to challenge this law. So I held a meeting, asked for a meeting, and it was granted to me at the City Hall to demonstrate how one constructs a chart, how one reads a chart, and so forth, that this is a mathematically based science, artistic in the interpretive part of it, but nonetheless totally scientific in the construction of it. It's not, just hocus pocus, we're going to make up something off the top of our head. And I guess I spent about 2.5 to 3 hours in that session, and we had people just basically almost like hanging out of the window, so to speak, because it was just a jam-packed room. Well, at the end of the session, the city attorney, the guy who was hearing me was one of the judges. He, still referred to the city attorney, and the city attorney came back, well, sir, it's still, in our rules, our statuary, it's still known as part of the fortune-telling laws and so forth in that locale. So you're not allowed to practice. However, subsequent to that event, I was, of course, writing at that time in a local newspaper, the Florence Herald. And subsequent to that event, I got more business than you can possibly imagine. None of the authorities ever had anything to say whatsoever to the negative about it, or never came to me, and said, we got to cite you with this or that and the other, breaking the law bit. But I ended up having quite a number of people who served not only in the Alabama state legislature, but also, in the local authorities. There's different people serving different positions there. There's an unwritten code, so to speak, in the field of astrology, and I think all astrologers who may be listening now know this with absolute certainty. You don't tell anybody for whom you've done a chart. You don't explain that, and I don't give out my client list to anybody. Nobody knows whether person A or person B or person C has ever come to me to have a reading, so to speak. It's a very quiet, confidential world. And I think because of that, that was a tremendous help to my continuing in that business without any further, interruptions, as it were. I had a lot of support from it. And I've still got some of those old newspaper clippings.
That's a great story. That's fabulous. So let me ask you on a personal level, can you give me an example of a way in which astrology has helped you in your personal life?
I can tell you, as God is my witness, it saved my life on 3 occasions.
Okay, let's hear about it.
Well, I wouldn't want to get into too much detail. It's going a little bit off on a tributary, but the bottom line was I'm in the music business. And at one point, I got involved unawares of this is when payola was a big deal, unawares with some people in the industry who were involved in payola. And had it not been for knowing charts, I wouldn't have discovered that in the first place, plus knowing how to read contracts, the music background contracts. So I decided I better get out of this situation. And I was told in no uncertain terms, since I knew what I knew, and I'd been sitting with lawyers for about 3 days in a row, that if I decided not to sign, that I'd end up in the Jersey River with concrete shoes the next day. I had every reason to believe them. Using astrology is what helped me to make the moves I needed to make at that time for my own personal safety and security. Using astrology helped me to know when to come out of the dark, so to speak, out of the obscure space, so to speak, and, be back, let's say, back public again.
Wow.
That's just one event.
Wow.
Astrology works.
Wow. Amazing. So I want to ask some questions about astrology itself before we get into world events. And let me ask you, everyone talks about Mercury Retrograde, and we have one coming up. What can you tell us about our sort of perceptions about Mercury Retrograde versus what is true about Mercury Retrograde? And what can you tell us to help us prepare for the retrograde that's coming up this month?
That's a super question, and it's very practical in application. All the planets, except, of course, using the sun and the moon luminaries as planets, all the planets go, relatively speaking, retrograde. The charts are drawn from a geocentric, Earth-centered, Earth-based point of view. That's relative point of view, not a true picture of the solar system, but from our Earth-based point of view. So if we look at the respective planets in their individual orbits going around the sun, never changing their direction and course, always going, relatively speaking, forward. From our Earth point of view, sometimes they appear to go backwards and turn back forward again. And it's easy to draw a diagram of that, but I guess it's kind of like when you've got, a faster car and a slower car going, across each other on a highway, or a car coming towards you on a highway and then going back from you on a highway. It looks like at one point it's coming direct, and another time it's going, away from you. The car hasn't changed direction. If you're passing an automobile on the highway, the other car didn't change direction, but from your point of view, it looked like it was first coming towards you, going direct, then was going away from you, going retrograde. All the planets do that, and it makes like a big figure S out there in the sky from the Earth point of view. Now, Mercury, which is the fastest moving of the planets, relative to the sun, powers to Pluto, the fastest moving of the planets, goes retrograde about 3 times a year and approximately 3 weeks each time. The next time it will go retrograde will be in October the 21st, 2013, this month. Will stay retrograde until the 10th of November of this month. That's when it turns back direct. Now, in that time frame, it will be going between the degrees of turning retrograde at 18 degrees Scorpio, 24 minutes, turning back direct at 2 Scorpio, 29 minutes. Well, in order for it to get to the 18 degree Scorpio in the first place, there's only 30 degrees in a sign, 60 minutes in a degree, and 60 seconds in a minute. So if we go forward, presently, if we look at now, where in the world is Mercury at this moment in time, we see that Mercury is about 15 degrees of the sign of Scorpio, heading towards its turnaround point. In other words, at 18 degrees, it will turn around into a retrograde motion. So it is in the zone, as it were, of the retrograde zone, but it isn't yet retrograde. Mercury symbolizes the way we make connections in life. Looks like our nervous system from the brain to the rest of the body, so to speak. It's a way we make connections. It's a way we can, use our 5 physical senses. So when Mercury is retrograde, it's like, for whatever reason, we all seem to get semi-dyslexic to a degree. And all the little things that, that get us through day by day by day just seem to somehow not quite be as easily, we're not as cognizant of them as we normally are. It's like when we get such things as lost or misdirected snail mail, or emails disappear into cyberspace. And we have little things that need attention that we somehow, if we go to mail a letter, we might forget to put a stamp on it. We need to take very close attention to the details. Details matter very, very much. And when Mercury's retrograde, during that period, which will be between the 21st of October and the 10th of November, it is very necessary to double, quadruple, quintuple check all of the details. There are a lot of treaties being signed currently, a lot of agreements being signed around the world currently. When Mercury is retrograde, well, those treaties may not, live up to their expectations because there may be some things missing in them, or people may misrepresent things during that kind of a time frame. And then as Mercury then turns back direct, it's like as though at the present time we see what the problems are during Mercury retrograde. We're able to analyze what to do about it, and then when it turns back direct, we're able to resolve those kind of problems, whatever they may be. But it's a very important time when with Mercury retrograde, when we need to keep very close attention to details in every single factor of life, and especially things that have to do with communications, transportations, connections of all kinds.
Wow. Okay, so you're more likely to miss your flight during a Mercury retrograde. Is that
Much more likely.
Okay.
Yeah, much more likely, because you looked at the board and you know, up there what the airline thing is, and for some reason twisted the numbers around.
Wow.
Or just happened to not see that particular listing.
Gotcha. And, you know, that leads me, I have one more question about this, and then we have a question in the chat room we'll go to. Mm-hmm. You know, a lot of people talk about Mercury retrograde as a time when their computers mysteriously break. Yeah. Does that really happen, or is it perhaps that they had hit wrong keys or put files in wrong places because they didn't pay attention to the details?
Both.
What do you think?
Both, because anything that has to do with connections, and my goodness, computers have billions of connections in them. Anything that has to do with connections anywhere along the line of the computer communications process, and or, you know, that typing something in, it's very easy to mistype something.
Gotcha. Okay.
Both fit.
Got it. So a couple of questions from the chat room.
Mm-hmm.
Does modern astrology originate from one culture, or is it a mixture of several?
All over the world.
Interesting.
Astrology, historically speaking, you know, we can trace it back to the Sumer, the ancient Babylonians, and so forth, and trace it back even further than that to the Chinese. It's up from all over the world.
Wow. Okay. And here's another question.
Okay.
So now let me start again. So now how important is the eclipse with regard to Mercury retrograde?
Well, it's important in the eclipses are bookends of time to me. That's the way I describe them. Bookends of time. We have several eclipses going on at present time. As an example, on the 18th of this month, there will be an eclipse at 25 degrees, a lunar eclipse at 25 degrees, about 25:42 of Aries, and then a solar eclipse on the 3rd of November at 11 degrees of Scorpio. Well, eclipses set up a space between, you know, the eclipses. They set up an atmospheric, as it were. It's like it bookends it within on a whole library shelf of books. You got one subject within that section, another subject within the section following it, and so on. As relative to Mercury retrograde, if Mercury's retrograde during an eclipse chart, then it depends on the other aspects to it as to how that's read. But it's a different subject altogether, eclipses and Mercury retrograde.
Okay, and another question, this time from Leave. What she says is the moon eclipse on November 3rd is that pronounced Yod? Y-O-D?
Yod.
Yod. Is it Yod? Ask Jim about the Yod. Okay, tell us about the Yod.
Okay, I'll have to pull up the eclipse data of that date. Just hold on just a second, Leave. I'll get right to it there. Take me here just a minute. I didn't have it in front of me.
That's okay. While you're looking it up, I want to let everyone know that Jim is available for private readings. You can get your chart done by Jim, and I think you should. Get a pen and a piece of paper. What you got to do is call him the old-fashioned way on the telephone, 813-474-8189, if you'd like to make an appointment to have Jim do your chart, and it is absolutely worthwhile. So right now, get a pen and a piece of paper, 813-474-8189. And we're ready when you are, Jim.
Okay. We have a couple of points here in this particular chart that's just fascinating. First off, the Mercury at 7 degrees of Scorpio is sextile to the Pluto at 9 degrees of Capricorn. Now, in any chart, when you have a sextile, there is a potential for a yod, because a yod is a point that's 150 degrees to either side of a sextile. So I wanted to look across here and see the relationship of the Mars to the Sun, Moon eclipse, and with Uranus as the yod to both of those points. Now, Lee sent me an email earlier today, and it was very, very sweet and insightful. Let's see here. Here's one of the things that she said. Uranus represents at the higher octave of Mercury, whereas Mercury is associated with the nerves in the body. Uranus is the synapse in the brain between the different axon dendrite synapse process. So it's a neurological, as it were, up in the higher brain level of the human body. It's a higher octave, a much faster moving. It's like, whereas in turning on a light switch, you got electricity. With a computer, you've got a whole different level. Electronics is a different level of electricity. You see what I mean? It's applied on a higher level. Now, one of the things that Lee said in this sweet email she sent me, and I'm grateful for this, she said, please keep in mind, I was impressed with it, so I actually copied it down. I said, please keep in mind the idea of Uranus as the creator of light, truth, and unimaginable surprises, which it does. It symbolizes surprises, unexpected things. Now, continuing, I know you also keep in mind that this is in enthusiastic Aries, where it certainly is on a mission. Now it's co-working with Pluto, the reformer, the purifier, and the transformer. In Capricorn, it is matter itself that's being reformed, purified, and transformed. Now let me explain that in relative to this yod in the new moon eclipse, which is a solar eclipse as of November the 3rd, 2013, at 7:50 and 12 seconds after 7:50 a.m. EDT over Washington. Since that eclipse is in Scorpio, the sign of transformation, there are major transformations going on in all of the houses of power all over the world. Scorpio is associated, of course, with other people's money, so the world's economic system is being transformed from America's U.S. dollar being the reserve currency of the world to what will ultimately end up being a compilation of a basket of currencies, perhaps headed by the yuan or maybe some SDRs with the yuan as leading those. So we have a major transformation going on around the world relative to scorpionic subject matter, one of those being economic power. Another of those being the ability of people within themselves to see things in a higher level of realization. That's part of this yod, also part of the fact that solar eclipse is within the sign of Scorpio. And it's being sextiled by Mars in Virgo, so this has to do with medical things. There's going to be some medical breakthroughs considering that. And also considering that Uranus is in Aries, the pioneering sign of the zodiac, we can anticipate all manner of new inventions over these next 6 months. We'll have a solar eclipse will last about 6 months minimum. And it usually works in groups of threes over a period of several years, but the immediate effects are within about a 6-month period. So we can say within these next 6 months, we can anticipate some incredible breakthroughs in the medical fields and in all fields related to the global economic structure. These are just two of the many areas that we'll be in. And that fits right in with what Lee was talking about with, Uranus being an enthusiastic Aries, where it's certainly on a mission, so to speak.
Brilliant. And again, you're getting so much love in the chat room here. People are really enthusiastic to hear what you're saying, as I am. Now, I want to switch gears just a little bit. One of the things that's been very helpful to me, as you've been kind enough to share some information with me, is the 4 Pillars of Astrology. Could you very briefly share your concept of the 4 Pillars of Astrology?
Anything that is built must be built on a solid structure.
Right.
Anything. There's another factor that's very important. Everything in the universe revolves around a center, whether it be an atom around the nucleus, or whether it be a solar system around its relative sun. Everything revolves around a center. In astrology, we have a language that is represented symbolically, like any other language. You've got the symbols of it. There are 4 sets of symbols in astrology. They are the symbols for the planets, symbols for the signs, symbols for the aspects, which is angles and arcs of degrees, and the symbols for the houses. Now, very briefly, the symbols for the planets represent in any chart the psychological urges, energies, and drives of the individual, or of the thing that we're studying, etc. The symbols for the planets, in one word, can be representative of one word: needs, our needs. The symbols for the signs. The signs are no more and no less than the Earth's orbit around the sun divided into 12 equal 30-degree sectors. It's not a bunch of star clusters out there in the sky, some constellation and so forth. It's only no more and no less than the Earth's orbit around the sun, 360-degree elliptical orbit, divided by 12, equal 30-degree sectors. Now, the signs then represent a filter through which our needs are focused. Like if you were to put a colored gel over a light, and you got this big beam of light, and then there's a colored gel over the light that changes the hue of the light, but not the original light.
Right.
The symbols for the aspects. Aspects are no more and no less than the number of degrees and a number of degrees between position A, position B, within a circular chart. Well, how many degrees are there? It doesn't matter whether it's 0 degrees or 180 degrees or anything in between. It's called an aspect. It's an angle. These aspects represent the help or hindrance in the meeting of our needs as they're filtered through the signs.
Right.
The houses are based upon the longitudinal, latitudinal grid upon the Earth from which the chart is drawn. Like if I'm in Norway or somewhere, closer to the Arctic Circle, relatively speaking, you've got it's where these longitudinal lines come together. You've got very wide houses in some sectors and very narrow ones in others. If you're closer to the equator, it's almost equal all the way around, the distance of the width of the houses. So the houses is a latitudinal, longitudinal grid design within which the rest of the chart is drawn. And the houses represent in a chart the department of life wherein these planetary urges and needs and drives, as they're filtered through the signs and as they are angled with the aspects, helped or hindered, where they find their practical working out. Does that make sense to you?
If someone had explained that to me when I first developed an interest 20 years ago, I'd be an astrologer now. Yes, I think that makes perfect sense. It's brilliant. Okay, I'd like to shift gears here now, and I'd like to talk about world events. I would say, regardless of one's political beliefs, I think one thing that we could all agree on is that right now, this minute, here in the United States, our politicians aren't getting along very well.
Mm-hmm.
We might also say, right? We might also say that our nation is sort of ideologically divided in a way that maybe it's not been before. When we look at that, our divided ideology, you've already touched on some of the financial issues, the government shut down. Talk to us. How does astrology give us
let's get it on a wider picture. The Earth, being part of a many-bodied system, is subject, I thought, the entire Earth, every living thing on the Earth, as the Earth spins on its axial rotation, as it goes through its orbital revolution, is subject to its relationship with the rest of our local solar system. At current time, for the first time since 1932 to 34, two planets of relatively slow orbital revolution in their own right are 90 degrees approximately from one another because of, like we covered, the retrograde motion of Mercury earlier. Because of retrograde motion of these two respective planets, this dance between them at the relatively 90 degrees, approximate 90-degree position from themselves, or from each other from the Earth point of view, this approximate 90-degree angle, calling it square, from August of 2010 all the way through early spring, actually in March of 2015. It's almost a 5-year dance. This does not happen frequently. These planets are Uranus and Pluto, respectively. Uranus takes 84 years to move its cycle. Pluto takes 248 years to move its cycle. Every astrologer around the country, around the world, has been very familiar with this, called the cardinal climax. And the times when these planets hit exactly 90 degrees, which is a stressful degree. 90 degrees is just a square. It shows stress, shows complications, competition, that kind of stuff. These points are June the 24th of 2012, September the 19th, 2012, May the 20th, 2013, November the 1st, 2 days before the eclipse of 2013, and April the 21st of 2014, December the 15th, 2014, and March the 19th of 2015. Now, these are the times when they'll make an exact square one to another. Let me use an illustration to help you see, a picture of it, so to speak. Let's say we're in a covered wagon. We've been riding across the Great Plains, and we're about to go into the mountains, over the mountains, and on finally to the sea over at the end of California. Well, the green grass of hopes and everything's on the other side of these mountains. The reality is that on November the 1st, we will be at the peak of, mountaintop number 4 at that time. Well, actually, number 3 is 3 on either side. And number 4, so 3 is on either side. So we're in the middle of a series of mountain peaks. So all the time we're between the exact square of June the 24th, 2012, and the exact square of March the 16th of 2015. We're in the middle of the mountains. This is a stressful period. The whole goal, the idea, is to get across the mountains without the wagon being torn apart. What would tear the wagon apart? Well, if you got into a war with somebody, that'd tear it apart, for one thing. And this is one of the things that, I'm sure that most astrologers have hoped would not be going on, to be a major war. We're trying to avoid a war. Well, there's a time when you can avoid a war by, capitulating to whatever. There are other times when you avoid a war by standing on principle that is good. But there's just different things. But the bottom line is, at present, we're halfway across this huge set of mountain peaks of great intensity for the world. You see it in the weather. You see it in, political things. You see it in military things. You see it in in people's homes and everywhere. The world is changing. Uranus symbolizes the individual awakening. Pluto would represent, in this larger context, the principles of tyranny or some form of oppressive control of a government over its people around the world. Since these things, since this has been going on, this has been the bottom line. The people are wakening up. Remember, we talked about the Uranus being the neuronic, synapses and so forth in the brain. We are awakening. And it's like David said, I really appreciate her calling in. My goodness, it's 3 o'clock in the morning over there, a little bit after. Where she's describing, Uranus is, it's the center of light. The people are awakening to an enlightenment. That's the individuals. Well, Pluto is power and control of the mega corporations of the globe. Corporatocracy. Well, they're trying to enshrine that corporatocracy in all kinds of agreements around the world, whether it be the Chinese working, through the BRICS countries, establishing, agreements to have the natural resources of just about every major continent on Earth, and to ultimately establish a basket of currencies to undermine and replace the U.S. dollar as the primary currency, and or whether it be the corporations, whether it be headquartered in this country or any other country, but doing a lot of business from this country, going and working from Big Pharma on Monsanto or any of them, overriding the people's needs, giving them bum stuff or undermining all of the environmental values. No matter what it is, corporatocracy would be the Pluto. So we've got Uranus squaring Pluto. They are squared off to one another. They're like in a type of conflict of their own. And now we look recently, and we see how Putin, who heads up Russia, has just done a wonderful job from his point of view of securing the Middle East, access to the Middle East, without a shot being fired. He doesn't have to, go to war to get it. That's what he's wanted, that space down in that area, Syria and so forth. And you can look at it from the Shia to the Sunni Muslims. You see the same principle going on. There's so many little details involved. I'm just trying to be, we don't have much time, so I'm trying to put it all great big picture here. But Uranus-Pluto square is what is the root of everything that's happening around the globe at present, will continue in this dance of the individual versus the state until after the 16th of March of 2015. Now, whether it ends in a war between the haves and the have-nots, or between the people and their governments, or between, one military against the other, we don't know yet for certain.
Right.
There's a lot of reason to think that it might. But given the current trajectory, current pattern, that it would push that forward, I don't think it will. And here's why. We have the Chinese looked at the American forces as saying, well, the United States is the biggest, most powerful military on earth, and the reason not is because it is them per se, but because of their allies. The Chinese see us as having at least 50 allies around the world. Our friends who have come to our aid in case we got into an issue with, let's say, the cross-channel straits with Taiwan, or over South Korea, or over the islands that they are in a conflict with in Japan, or whatever. They know that they don't want to go to war with the United States because they don't have all of those allies. So they're in the process of developing them. They are making agreements all over the world with different countries to build their friendships, to build up their bases. Their technological explosion is just absolutely admirable. They're being guided by, at present, two of the brightest people in terms of political people, in terms of actual intellectual people running a country that maybe is on this planet presently. We've got we have the charts of Xi Jinping, Gemini, brilliant man. I've got his chart over here. We got the charts of the premier, this Premier Lee. These are brilliant people. Mr. Lee was head of that Three Gorges Dam project, among many, many other things. These people think carefully. They think in 10, 20, 50-year terms. Americans don't do that. Most Europeans don't do that. Europe and America is, do I say on the downturn? This whole train is headed for a collapse at the bottom of the hill because it is a credit-based system, and there's got to be a new one to replace it. I do not see any way that the old order of America, which I love so much, I'm a hardcore conservative, I don't personally see how the original ideas of the Founding Fathers can be resurrected in the current climate without a revolution, except in the evolutionary process of it finally collapsing of its own, let's say, internal black core. And not that the original ideas work, but that what has been grafted onto American concept has become a darkened core. It's almost like a majority of minorities add together, and you no longer have, a contiguous. Let me use an illustration. When you do in your computer, when you do defragmentation, you want to get the, a solid line or a solid bar across, so you don't have a lot of little specks in between, a lot of little spaces in between, whether they be red or green or whatever, or red or white or whatever. You want to have a contiguous line. We don't have a contiguous society anymore, as primarily do the Japanese or the Chinese or most of Asian countries. They are rising. There has been a shift of the center of gravity, as is a regular 500-year cycle. A shift of the center of gravity of world power goes every 500 years approximately from the east to the west, back from the west to the east. And this has been a thing that's been going on for centuries and centuries and centuries, regardless of the technologies of the times. It has now shifted completely to the Asian level. The Asians now have, and I know that China is trying to be the premier power in Asia. Well, they've got to resolve some stuff in the South China Seas with who owns what islands and who has what rights in what lands and so forth, natural resources and so on. But they also have problems with their aging population. They got over 200 million people that's over the age of 60 right now.
Wow.
And they're, pushing that forward. Well, 200 million to them is not a whole big percentage, but it's a big percentage. But anyway, the bottom line is how they're going to make their internal market become their primary market instead of them always having to reach out to external markets for their primary market. They're in the process of doing it. There's changes going on, but they're going on with careful analysis, careful forethought, careful planning, and steadfast execution. Simultaneously, in this country, there have been some really pathetic situations, sad situations going on for the American people. You've had, a number of agreements that have been developed behind Congress's back, which include, coming out of the United Nations, things like Agenda 21, which basically say, okay, the Western democracies, Illuminati, these will run the world. And this is how we're going to do it in the 21st century, hence Agenda 21. They've been doing this for a very long time using the environmental concepts, the sustainability, sustainable development, these keywords as the trigger points to hit people emotionally. So that ultimately the power rests in the governing body, which may not be the elected officials, but rather organizations that have been created and who create regulations and be run by edicts and regulations as opposed to laws that were developed by actual representatives of the people, as was our original, constitutional construct. So there's a lot of things going on that are just troubling, to say the least. But I see America on a downhill run. Along with it, Europe. Europe is in worse shape than we are. And I can pull up all of the charts. I've got all the charts of every major nation on the planet. But, and I'm indebted considerably, to Nicholas Campion for his book of the World Horoscopes. But we've also got the charts that of most of the world's leaders. And we've studied that, and we see what is the trajectory. I know I would like to see it, but I have no, that's not for me to determine what should be. But rather, we look and see what is the pattern of behavior of the world leaders today, and which way is it logically going. The idea is that there ultimately be Sharia law to overcome or undermine, rather, and ultimately overcome, first off, the Western Europe cultures, then have the inroads into this country. They're already doing this. It's sad. And then the other point has to do then with not only by whose law would they be operating under, but also by what economic system would they be operating under. You can't have these competing systems. The Chinese seem to see, I listen to CCTV quite a lot, and various other sources in that direction, to try to see where are they coming from, what do they think, what do they believe. They seem to believe that within the next 20 years, not only, next year, America will be the #1 oil producer in the world. Well, that's all well and good. Mr. Obama had nothing to do with that. He tried to stop it. That's only because of the Bakken shale productions up there that, first off, state-owned and or privately owned. If it had been up to him, we wouldn't have that option. But at any rate, there's changes in the energy base. There's changes in and we look at money as a type of energy. There's changes in the economic structure. There's changes in the political structures. All of these things have already been authored.
Wow. I really appreciate that perspective in the sense that, it's hard to be living in these times. It's frustrating, it's difficult, and it's scary. And to hear that there is some sense that it is part of a natural order.
Let me give you another piece of information. In the 2020s, where we have squares currently in effect, you will have trines and sextiles along every single one of the slower moving planets, putting an era of absolute harmony and global, brotherhood, if you want to use that term, and that would be appropriate. Through most of the 2020s, We're talking about a 6, 8, 10-year period of absolute relative to what we've got now, harmony on this planet. I probably won't be alive then, but I can be, I'm happy to know my children will be, and or my grandchildren, because that time frame is going to be peaceful. Beautiful. Very peaceful. And I'm hoping that we can get through this, this particular decade without a major war, but considering that the way things are going, you've got a Neville Chamberlain type situation going on right now, where Putin has some he just took advantage of a lot of stuff, and so does this new guy who's just come into Iran. Just studying his charts this very day, he is as wicked as anything you could possibly imagine. His son committed suicide to avoid staying alive in the world in which he lived, and wrote a big note to that effect. Anyway, he's no different than Ahmadinejad. They are playing America like a fool on a hill. They're just absolutely undermining everything that has to do with any kind of security or serenity this country could have ever known. We've got to find our country, our roots again. Roots are greater than grass.
Well, I hate to say it, but we're coming to the end of our time together, and I got to bring everything back to tarot, because I always do. It's interesting that the card of the week was the Tower.
The Tower. I found that fascinating, absolutely fascinating, and it fits perfectly.
It really does, and in its reversal reminds us that golden age is coming. And Jim, I got to say, it has been a golden moment having you here in the Psychic Cafe. I know you're not watching the chat room, but I have been, and people have been very engaged with you, really appreciating what you have to say.
So
I have a million more questions for you, so we will have to have you back on soon. I hope you'll do us that honor.
I will be glad to. We'll work out the arrangements on it. I'd be more than happy to, dear. And I'm grateful for the people who's joined us in the chat room. That means the world to me. Thank you so much.
Well, thank you for being here. I want to remind everyone, if you want to talk to Jim privately, give him a call, 813-474-8189. Thanks for being here at Christiana's Psychic Cafe. We've got a new show coming up next. It's called Close to Death. So stand by for that. And everyone, thank you so much. Have a great week. We'll see you next week. Thank you, Jim Cummins.
Thank you, Christiana.